Hey everybody, it's Mo here. What if, what if we had on the show the person who wrote the most cited paper ever on the strategic management of an organization? That'd be pretty cool. But what if that person wasn't just an academic? They had also built three huge organizations, including one that just got to the $1 billion level, and he was the founder. So we can blend evidence-based academics with real-world practical solutions around growth. Guess what? That's who we've got. David Teece, how's that for an intro?
Oh, thanks, Mo. Very generous intro.
Yeah. So the paper that I know you've written is the basics of a book that I just love called Dynamic Capabilities in Strategic Management, Organizing for Innovation and Growth. And if there's one thing that our audience likes learning about, it's growth. So why don't we just start with you? Obviously a deeply researched academic, but also has built your latest organization that you've started, BRG, just topped over the $1 billion level recently. Like, what a feat. Can you just give us the quick version of your background and how you got into all these things, and then we'll drop into your strategies?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have a PhD in economics from the Wharton School, but I was never sure I wanted to be an academic. I'm a full professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and got an affiliation here in Florida as well. Never thought I wanted to be a full-time academic, and I was always told you couldn't reconcile the two. You either had to choose to be a full-time researcher if you wanted to make it up through the ranks, or, you could be a consultant or do industry stuff. That was a different world, and if you did the industry stuff, you'd never get back into academia.
Yeah.
Well, I've tried to prove that wrong. So I've run two careers in parallel, basically, as a researcher. While initially trained in economics, I really got interested in management, and in particular, the whole question of the competitive advantage of the business enterprise. What more fundamental question is there in business or in the economy than how do you build firms and keep them great? How do you build firms that have sustainable competitive advantages? And not only are stock analysts interested in that, but nation states are interested in that. Everyone wants to have a prosperous, growing, expanding firm. And my training in economics, led me to think about firms in a very narrow way, sort of efficiency-based, cost-minimizing view of the world. And then I came to understand the reason why the theory of the firm in economics was built that way was because that was the simplest way to build it and the way that you could model it. And given that there's a big emphasis on analytics, we chased down a pathway where firms were in many ways caricatured as being just efficiency instruments, even when they are run well. Of course, I recognize, living on the edge of Silicon Valley, that innovation is really what keeps firms ahead. And yet the economics literature really treats innovation with the back of the hand, when in fact it should be center stage. So I realized, after teaching MBA students and many doctoral students, I had to really rewrite the book with respect to the theory of the firm, but to do so in a way that would be helpful to practitioners as well. And that's what led to this framework called Dynamic Capabilities. First of all, you had to recognize that there is no language of capabilities in the economics textbooks, which, when you think about it, remarkable. Mo, if I was to ask you what makes firms great, three sentences into it, you'd probably use the word capabilities. And I think most people on the street would likewise refer to capabilities in some fashion. But why is it omitted from the textbook? Well, it's omitted from the textbooks because it's hard to model. And moreover, in economics, we like to use equilibrium assumptions, that things are always in balance when we know they're not. So really what you see with the Dynamic Capabilities framework is my stumbling efforts to build a new theory of the firm that's relevant for a world where there's deep uncertainty, disequilibrium, and where innovation is foremost, or needs to be foremost, if you're going to sustain competitive advantage. Look, I can go on and discuss various elements of dynamic capabilities, and I'm sure you'll ask me to do so, but let me just pause there to see if you have a question before I plow into some of the simple taxonomies that I think are relevant.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, I saw hints of Clayton Christensen and all kinds of other innovative kind of things within the book. And you, of course, talked about the differences between Porter's five forces and how that doesn't quite answer all the questions that you need to. And I could just see how you can almost look back as you read the book and see your brain spinning over years to figure out, how do I describe what actually happens in the world? So why don't I kick back to you and just I think probably the first question to ask around what dynamic capabilities is like, how does it compare to ordinary? And I think you do a really great job in the book. And I think that's where we should start.
Yeah, well, let me begin by saying that I started talking about dynamic capabilities, and I realized that people were getting confused. I mean, there are many different types of capabilities, and I had to back up. And actually, some of my colleagues, Sid Winter in particular, were the first to sort of say, well, David, you need to think about what's not a dynamic capability, but still a capability. That
Mm,
led me to ordinary capabilities. And ordinary capabilities are really what the textbooks are all full of. It's about how do you get to do things well? It's about optimization, it's about best practices. But with dynamic capabilities, what I'm really saying is beware of best practices. And that's because firms following best practices have often gone out of business. And why is that so? And it's because they're making the wrong things at the wrong time. They're not meeting a customer need. So being efficient at producing the wrong things won't, get you a home run. So the question is, how do firms figure out how to do the right things? And that's where dynamic capabilities comes in. And I figured out that a simple way to think about it is that firms have to get good at three things: sensing and sense making, which is the business of where is the market going? Where's the technology going? And while we all observe what's happening and we can read a lot and we can experience a lot, people can draw different conclusions from the facts. And that's why sense making is just as important as sensing. You know the story of Pearl Harbor, where we had early radar set up on Diamond Head. And the assumption was when we saw dots that they were seagulls, or it must be our own planes. When they called down to the base, no, or our own planes are on the ground, well, then it must be seagulls. Well, the sense making was wrong because we didn't contemplate the fact that it maybe it's Mitsubishi Zeros in the air, because it's a scenario that was beyond our comprehension. So sensing and sense making are really critical. And then even if you figure out the future, which is what sensing and sense making is about, you got to be able to execute. Like Xerox was fantastic. Xerox created at Xerox PARC all the key elements of the personal computer revolution. The mouse, the laser printer, the GUI interface all came out of Xerox. But they failed almost completely to capitalize on that because they got the sensing right, but the seizing, which is, okay, now I got to invest behind these insights and behind this technology, they failed miserably because they were distracted by M&A activity. And I think also there was a gap between the East Coast and the West Coast. Xerox PARC was on the West Coast, on the edge of Silicon Valley, maybe the middle of Silicon Valley. And Xerox headquarters were back in Connecticut, I believe, at that time. And there were two different classes of managers. The folks that had written the check to set up Xerox PARC, I think it was $100 million a year or something like that, they were not in the boardroom deciding what priorities should be at Xerox. So you've got to be able to execute as well. And then if you get it right, it's not going to stay right for long. You got to be constantly transforming and rejiggering. So hence the sensing, seizing, transforming are activities which are incredibly important when you're managing technologies or when you're managing in environments of rapid technological change, or quite frankly, geopolitical disturbances too. It's a framework that's fit for the world of deep uncertainty. And deep uncertainty can arise not just because of technological change, but also because of geopolitical and regulatory changes.
yeah. Yeah. I want to dig into the three pieces so the audience can follow for sure: sensing, seizing, transforming. One, two, three. As I was reading your book, I thought of a particular litigator that we worked with years ago. And she was in one of our classes. learning business development techniques. And she had a really successful litigation practice. So it's almost like the enemy of great is when you've already got it good, right? Like those folks in Xerox on the East Coast are like, we don't need anything new. We're doing great, right? They didn't sense it right, certainly didn't seize it, never got to transform. She mentioned to me in the hallway in the middle of a workshop, she said, hey, I'm seeing this opportunity. She might even use the word sense. I'm not sure. It's been so long. But she says, I'm sensing this opportunity, say, in the defense of cybersecurity attacks. There's been one big one, or maybe I didn't know if there was one big one at that point, but she thought there would be. And she's like, I'm afraid to steer my whole career there because I'm not sure. It's obvious now this is a big deal. At the time, it wasn't at all. It was a major risk. And one thing I said to her was like, you don't have to think of this like an on-off switch. Like you're either what you've done in the past or you need to do what you're going to do in the future. Think of it like a dial. You're just going to start creating content. You're going to start speaking at conferences. A lot of your new content creation can be around cyber, but you can still do the work you've done before. And over time, you could be out in front of this very, big curve of growth. And she did that. And David, now she's one of the top cybersecurity defense lawyers in the world because she took that risk. She sensed it. She seized on it. She didn't let go of what she had done before, but she stayed busy. She stayed billable while she built this new brand in a new area that she thought would be high growth, and then transformed her whole career to the extent, well, now there's hundreds of people that report to her. So she's transformed lots of other lawyers in her firm in addition to all the clients she's impacted. So with that as a story, a lot of our audience is running a big significant part of their organization. A lot of other people are running their own book of business. What's your super practical advice if somebody's barreling down the highway, they're listening to this, they're going, I've had this nagging suspicion that I should shift my career in this new area. They're sensing it, but they don't know what to do. How do they make that change happen?
That's a very good question. I mean, it's about being able to maintain some amount of focus on the ordinary while also investing in the dynamic. My good friend Charles O'Reilly at Stanford and Mike Tushman at Harvard have a concept of ambidexterity, which sort of captures part of what you have to do. You've got to do both to some extent. When there's deep uncertainty, the priority has to be towards dynamic and the new stuff, but you still got to keep trundling along doing ordinary operational stuff at the same time. And this is an inherent tension in organizations, particularly as they get big. They start entrepreneurial. Then as they get big, there's a large bureaucracy, and the everyday thing can drown out the new thing. So what really makes an exceptionally good manager is their ability to keep the new and the old going together. And if need be, jettisoning the old. If you're going to jettison something, jettison the old. I remember when Netflix got started early on and you get DVDs by mail, and then they jettisoned that completely and went to online. And the market went crazy and trashed the company's stock. But it was the right move. And the market, in my view, was dumb. It should have said, wow, this is the right thing to do. Let's reward a company that is making such a bold move. And eventually they did, but not instantaneously. So having insights around when is the right time to abandon the old and embrace the new is very important.
Yeah, so that's a great example. So I think a lot of publicly traded companies are handicapped because they got that next quarterly earnings call that they're worried about. And it just brings the focus to this real short-term level when, to your point, Netflix won and Apple won with the iPhone because they blew up the iPod. They took out to do a new thing that maybe was going to work, maybe didn't, became maybe the biggest consumer product of all time. How does a professional take that risk? You've done it yourself many times. You've coached all the experts at BRG, amazingly deep experts, at a now $1 billion enterprise that you've obviously grown. How does an individual jettison the old and focus on the new, but feel comfortable doing it?
Well, you need a fair amount of individual resilience. And quite frankly, I think those individuals that save their money and have a little bit of net worth are more readily able to do this. The people that get trapped are those that are living day to day because their own personal balance sheet is over leveraged. So you get rid of the leverage in your personal balance sheet, or don't get rid of it entirely, but get it down to manageable levels so that you can afford to take personal risks and recognize that that may involve changing organizations, but hopefully not. Hopefully you can do it all within an organization. But you have to have, some financial resilience as well as some psychological resilience, because everyone is going to tell you at first that you're wrong, or they're going to look, even if they don't, that you're going to look skeptically at you, and you're going to be a loner for a while. Someone once remarked, you can build a house with the bricks that are thrown at you whenever you're starting something new, because everyone's going to tell you it's not the right. And then, of course, suddenly when it's clear that it's the right thing, they will claim to have believed that all along. So to be a pioneer, intellectual pioneer or business pioneer, you need resilience and you need self-confidence. If you're looking for accolades from people around you, and that's what keeps you going, then you may find there's only a small group of folks, and perhaps none, that are going to support you until it's obvious that you're a winner, and then they're all going to support you.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? I've always thought that I brought up Clayton Christensen before, The Innovator's Dilemma. It might be good to have you describe it for the audience as an academic yourself. But the way I take it is there's certain industries or sectors or elements of work that are going to grow exponentially. And in the beginning, exponential looks really small. When you go from 1 to 2% to 4% in the first 3 years, that's exponential, but it's still only 4%. It's not until it's 8, 16, 32, 64 that people go, oh, look at that. And I feel like with services and deeply expertise-driven businesses, if you can find those things, like the cybersecurity litigation example I gave before, if you can find those things where you can catch it early and become the preeminent expert in something that's growing rapidly, things get a lot easier. Is that your take? Do you have a different take? As I read the book, I was super curious about this.
Well, I think the way to do it is to establish yourself as a thought leader early on. And because no one's going to hire you until the problems are manifest. So thinking ahead about this, but you try it on a few clients, you're not going to get a warm reception. People are going to entertain you and cock their head to one side and be curious, but they're not going to say, "Yeah, come on in and let's work on this," and until the other shoe drops, in which case then they're looking around. Well, who knows something about this? And if you've established yourself as a thought leader, you got some publications out there, you're then in the front position. And it's not hard, at least in my view, it's not hard to get out there with some serious thought leadership pieces. And you can do that with, two of the fingers in your hand, of your left hand, while you're busy working with the right hand. And you probably need to have more than one opportunity, and maybe it's cybersecurity and something else. So a diversified portfolio of new things, and then be ready to pivot quickly towards them as the market takes off. It involves extra work, and it involves looking up from what you're doing. I mean, in the consulting world, there's an enormous incentive to chase the dollar right in front of you and not next year's or the year's dollar. And in my view, you got to be chasing them all at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that we promote in our book, Give to Grow, and in our classes is document your opportunities in 3 tranches: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And we have specific definitions for that I'll skip over. But the idea is that, much like investing in the stock market, you want the asset allocation is the main thing that correlates to success. You want a certain amount of long-term things, stock, little shorter term bonds with less variability, and cash to even it all out and make the variance in the mean exactly what you want on an efficient frontier. And I think there's a way to balance an opportunity list that's similar. We want the right amount of short, medium, and long term. So question back to you. This was another thing that just kept screaming at me as I read this ridiculously well documented book, because David, I was thinking about you, and I was thinking about our hallway conversation we had when we met. And I can remember leaving that thinking, here's a guy that has become the most cited researcher in the area of dynamic capabilities. So you've been a leader in this deep well of research. While I'm sure you've had to build time and have your own practice. While thirdly, you built a firm from you in an office up to $1 billion. How do you balance all those things? It's really
Well,
remarkable.
the most important thing is to surround yourself with very capable people. And I have been fortunate with every company I've built to have a partner who was full time and completely dedicated and completely in sync with my vision, which meant that, I had to some extent, compromise in a nice way, of course, and accept elements of their vision so that we were absolutely locked together at the kneecaps. And I did it three times I've built as the founder businesses fit that model precisely, where I had somebody who was complementary to me and was a force and could grow along with the company. And so surrounding yourself with top talent and getting alignment with top talent is absolutely critical.
How do you do that?
How did I do that? Well, by exciting people with a vision of the future and finding people that could be excited and were forward looking, and then not acting as an authoritative tyrant, but acting very much as a team player and giving one's business partner full reign and full support on everything. So, you're going to bite your lip every now and again, and something's going to happen which you didn't think was quite right, but you bite your lip and everybody learns from it and you move on. But that's the only way I could do it, quite frankly. So it looks miraculous, but in fact, it's the case. Whenever there's something great that happens, you peel it back. There's always multiple folks that are responsible for it.
One of the things I see a lot, David, I don't know if it's with you, you see this, I'm curious, is a lot of times high end experts are so good at their craft, they're reluctant to delegate. And because I was an actuary in a former life and took all those exams, I think in math a lot. But I think, like, hey, if I can delegate to somebody else, let's say there's 10 people on a team, if they're all just 80% as good as I was, that's like eight more people. And
Yeah.
a lot of people can get stuck where they think, I can't give it to somebody else because I can do it better. And I think that's the wrong question. Along this team idea, the right question is, how can I give everything I can to other people so that I can do the things unique for me? And I would guess you have a similar mindset, but tell me if that's not true or how you think
No,
about it.
absolutely, that's the case. I do a lot of expert reports and expert testimony work. I also do advisory work. But in all of these instances, I delegate and I find people who are actually better than me at those tests. And, I learn as much from the team player as they learn from me, if not more. But my role, what I really like to do is to synthesize and integrate and to provide the inspiration and the ideas, and then to see other people develop them out. Now, somebody else may have the opposite approach or have interests that are opposite from mine. The model works that way too, but you've got to be willing to accept that you're not the smartest guy in the room. If you're the smartest guy in the room, you made a mistake. You're supposed to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. That's my approach, and I've succeeded in surrounding myself with people that are smarter than I am. That way I look good too.
So I think now's the perfect time to drop into a couple of questions around practicality, like practically, how do we do these things? So maybe you could choose an organization you've studied. You could choose BRG if you want. I think that's interesting. But can you share a story of how an organization has used dynamic capabilities to have outsized growth? And like what were some of the major things they did to sense, seize, and transform?
Well, let's take the Berkeley Research Group. We innovated with respect to new compensation models. It started a long time ago back with my first company, the Lauren Economics Consulting Group. And now, at least in many parts of professional services, elements of our model have sort of been adopted by others, but it's much more metrics based. It's high autonomy, high accountability model. You have to build accounting systems behind it and measurement systems behind it to make it work. So we've created an organization that is decentralized. And a decentralized organization is one that's more adaptive. And, you're able to turn on the creative powers of lots of other people. And that's what keeps you in tune with the markets. It's not because some guy at the top is leading, it's because guys on the front line have the flexibility and the entrepreneurial culture in the organization to support that. So no one's going to say no to people striving out into new things, particularly when you're at risk. So that there's implicitly a co-investment model behind it all, which is, yeah, the firm's investing in you, but you must invest in yourself, and you better be exploring new opportunities. And we're giving you the freedom to do so. We're making sure that the structure doesn't get in the way. A lot of organizations build structure that gets in the way. And as we grow from 1 billion to 2 to 3 to 4, one has to maintain constant vigilance to make sure that structure doesn't get in the way and that structure helps more than it hurts. It's always going to get in the way to some extent, but not enough to kill the entrepreneurship and to allow plenty of room for new initiatives and for individual and group excitement to happen.
Yeah. What's so interesting to peel that back is, and I'm thinking of like all the experts I've met at BRG, and it really seems like because you've developed this sort of high autonomy, high risk, you can really do
High
whatever you want. But
accountability.
yeah,
High autonomy, high accountability. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That's a much better way to say it. And because you've got that, not only do you attract the people that want that, that are going to be high performers, they have a chance to live a better life and because they're betting on themselves when they join BRG, but also then I would guess that dynamic capabilities are much higher to your point because you've got hundreds of these people thinking about micro markets and adapting to those as opposed to your point, like some kind of God on a high that says, you must do things in this way. There's just no, it's that model seems like it would be much, much harder to be dynamic. Is that right?
Yeah. No, look, I think most people are curious and they want to do new things. Part of the job is just getting out of the way and then keeping a supportive culture in place to enable new initiatives, new projects, new methodologies to be embraced. And I think that's what we've done. And making sure that also there's ability to cooperate across diverse groups of people. You know, problems don't get dished up in neat and tidy ways, and yet people want to organize, well, they want organizations to be neat and tidy. But but in fact, you need the flexibility for talent anywhere to be deployed somewhere, both geographically and across fields. And so being able to do that, not everyone's going to do it, but those that want to do it should be able to do it. And it makes for more interesting professional development, by the way, if you have a chance to work across practice areas and so forth. And, some parts of the company that's less valued, the marketplace is steady. There's, a lot of repetition and the jobs look kind of similar. But there's always going to be some part of the organization where that's not true, or some part of the market where that's not true.
Let's say, by the way, I just love problems don't get dished out in neat and tidy ways. I just put a big red box around that. I love that phrase. So you got to collaborate to get these things done. So follow up, let's say, everybody in the audience either leads their own book of business. Many people lead a geography or a practice area or a product set or whatever. Many people lead those people who lead those people. But the point is, everybody is in charge of some aspect of growth, at least for them and probably for a large team. Using the dynamic capabilities framework, if you'd said, hey, you got to do these three things right, and we could drop back into the sensing, seizing, transforming. But if somebody had to do something like this week, what would your advice be to be super practical to get started to become more dynamic?
Well, one, I would say be aware of changing circumstances with respect to your clients. It's the old story of not going to where the puck is, but where the puck is going to be. So thinking ahead for your clients and being ready to move quickly and with agility to assemble the right team in short order. Because often when particularly if there's a crisis, people want to see things happen quickly and they want to see you have the right talent. And that's where larger organizations do have a competitive advantage if they're able to actually act with agility. Just being big in and of itself won't do you much good. But if you're both big with diverse talents and a new project comes along that requires both heft in terms of numbers of people and then also specific knowledge, you hope you have it in the organization. Then you also have to have the ability to reach outside the organization if need be. And the McKinseys of the world are kind of reluctant to do that because they think their own brand is so precious that somebody that's not a McKinsey person couldn't possibly be on a McKinsey team. That's not the attitude at the Berkeley Research Group. Often there's more talent outside, particularly in new areas, than there is inside, and our job is to engage with them and possibly recruit them in if need be. So our model is also one of organic growth, is finding the best talent and bringing it in repetitively. That is part of our secret sauce. We haven't done any acquisitions, not to say we would never do acquisitions. I think often if there's a new beachhead, it's sometimes easier to do an acquisition if you recognize that that beachhead has the possibility of scaling and you're in a position to help scale. But the organic growth model, I think it's the tougher growth model, but it's the best growth model. And coming back to culture, the beauty of organic growth is that it enables you through the recruitment process to effectively convey what your culture is, at least to convey a good chunk of it. So your job is half done by the time someone joins. They've decided that they like your culture and you've spent a fair amount of time, exposing them to it. Whereas if you do an acquisition, you almost always import somebody else's culture, and then you have the culture wars breaking out. So not to say that acquisitions are not good, but it does mean you have to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is great. Okay. Last sort of big question before we wrap things up. I'm just curious from your perspective, as you look out 5 to 10 years, what things are you thinking about are the biggest trends that, hey, high expertise organizations better be focused on that area because there's going to be some outsized growth?
Well, obviously, the technology sector is driving the economy. And you might also have budget deficits are driving the economy too. But the technology sector, if you look at productivity, most of our productivity increase is coming from the technology sector. So being digital is important, and understanding digital marketplaces and what the new environment, what the new business models are, and how platforms work. I think one has to be very familiar with digital. And you mentioned cybersecurity and all of those things that go along with it. So I would say going deeper into digital is one thing. And then the other one is to understand this geopolitical environment we're in, because even if your business is entirely domestic, there are ramifications from it and there's opportunities from it. I mean, you look at the whole area of export controls and sanctions and what have you, this is sort of new and emerging opportunities, if you will, for professionals with respect to the regulatory environment. So the regulatory environment is changing. While we hear a lot of nice words about deregulation, government is in the business of regulating more than it's deregulating. And whether there's regulation or deregulation, whenever there's change, there's opportunities for professional talent because the existing organizations typically don't have the talent that's needed. So, having a nose for where change is likely to be the most dynamic is an important part of what an alert professional should have as their toolkit.
Yeah, I even like those words, alert professional. One of the sayings I was hearing in my mind as we've been talking together is, I think a lot of people think the big eat the small, but I've always thought like the fast eat the slow. And I think, there's certain aspects where somebody has a big platform with a huge moat and they're big and they're hard to upset. There's some truth to big beats small, but I think the one thing we can all control more of is, can we be fast? And I felt like that was an
Yeah.
undercurrent of the book.
Well, that is an undercurrent, but we have to be fast towards the right things too. I sometimes say that ordinary capabilities are about doing things right, and dynamic capabilities are about doing the right things. And I think actually Peter Drucker may have said that as well, and I'm not the only person to have said it, but one way to think about ordinary and dynamic capabilities is exactly that way. Doing things right, that's efficiency optimization, that's ordinary capability. but doing the right things. Where am I going to invest for the future? What are the new areas? How can I develop this new practice? If we're talking professional services, how can I bring innovation? Developing a new practice in professional services is tantamount to innovation. So you have to be doing both, and that creates certain organizational tensions. And the job of the top management team is to make sure that those two things can coexist in the organization comfortably and sensibly.
Yeah. Just the perfect bow at the end. Well, perfect. David, this has been great. I've been looking forward to it since I devoured the book. Where should people go to say thank you to you? Obviously, one thing they might think about is buying the book, Dynamic Capabilities and Strategic Management by David J. Teece. What other ways can people reach out to you if they want to know more or get to know you?
Well, they can always email me at the Berkeley Research Group, but there's a couple of little handbooks I'm coming out with, or at least Cambridge University Press is coming out with in their Cambridge Elements series. These are little short books. I've come to the unpleasant conclusion that people don't read long books anymore. And so I mainly written academic articles or professional articles, but these are short monographs, like 70 or 80 pages, that you can get through in a plain read. And I've also put it in sort of practitioner language rather than scholarly language. So keep an eye out for the Cambridge Elements series on dynamic capabilities that I'm authoring, as well as 2 or 3 on dynamic competition as well. But that will be maybe for a different day.
Well, I'll work with you and the team, and we'll get all the links that are available, put those in the show notes for everybody so they can scroll down there and click on whatever they want. We'll put the Amazon link for Dynamic Capabilities since that's already out, and we'll put your email down there too. David, this has been awesome. Like I've been so excited. I think I showed you, I didn't show the audience if they're on video. Like I wrote up like 15 questions. We got through like a third of it. Someday we'll have to have you, maybe when you come out with those short books, maybe we'll have you on the show again and we'll dive into some of those. I really enjoyed today.
Oh, I'd love that. When the new books are out, that'll be something that people can follow up on. And I'm happy to talk about this because, it's not only a subject of academic and scholarly interest, but it's how I live my life as well.
Yeah. Yeah, which is really neat. Well, that's the perfect ending because that's how we started. You've got this amazing, deep expertise-driven mind where you've actually led a lot of this research, but you've also actually done it to great success. That's fairly rare to find. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.